Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to decode the foundational theory behind one of the most famous, intensely debated, and frankly unapologetic political frameworks in human history. We're looking at the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes, and specifically his incredibly unique take on human nature. Now, if you've studied political science, you've definitely heard of his social contract, or the absolute sovereign, but today, we're going right down to the root of it all.
I really want you to keep this central question in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. You see, when looking at human behavior, most classical thinkers asked moral questions, right? They wanted to know, are we inherently good or evil? But Hobbes, he does something completely radical. He bypasses morality altogether and looks at humanity through a purely scientific, almost biological lens.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. The foundation of politics. 2. Man as a machine. 3. Appetite, aversion, and reason. 4. Psychological egoism and power. 5. Clashing views of human nature. And finally, 6. The enduring Hobbesian legacy. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The foundation of politics. We really have to start at the bottom here, because for Hobbes, everything in politics builds directly on this one foundation.
Hobbes uses this strictly bottom-up deductive method. Step 1 is understanding our fundamental nature as individuals. Step 2 is putting those individuals together without laws, what he famously calls the state of nature, which inevitably, according to him, leads to total chaos. And step 3 is the only logical political solution to that chaos, an absolute sovereign. You simply can't understand why he argues for such unyielding state power until you understand exactly who he thinks that state is actually governing.
Moving to Section 2, Man as a Machine. Now, what's really fascinating about his approach is the context. He was writing right in the middle of the scientific revolution.
He was heavily influenced by the physics of his time, especially Galileo. And he takes this concept, known as mechanistic materialism, and applies it straight to the human mind and body. Hobbes argues that we are literally just matter in motion. There's no mystical soul driving our decisions here. Our emotions, our thoughts, our desires, they're strictly physical motions inside the body, just reacting to external stimuli based on rigid laws of cause and effect. It's all just physics.
Section 3. Appetite, aversion, and reason. So, if we're essentially just complex biological machines, just matter in motion, what exactly is moving us?
According to Hobbes, our behavior is driven by two basic motions. Appetite is when our bodily motion is drawn towards something we want. Aversion is motion away from something we dislike or fear. But pay close attention to the labels here. For Hobbes, good and evil aren't these universal objective morals handed down from above. No way. They are just subjective labels. Good is simply whatever your specific mechanical body has an appetite for, and evil is whatever it has an aversion to. It is absolute ethical subjectivism.
But you might be wondering, what about human logic? What about our brains? Well, Hobbes has a pretty radical view on reason too. Classical philosophers thought reason was this moral guide telling us right from wrong. Hobbes disagrees entirely. He argues reason is merely a calculative instrument. It's the slave of the passions. Think of it like this. If you're hungry, your reason acts like a GPS to find you food. It just calculates the most efficient route to satisfy your appetite. But it never ever stops to judge whether the hunger itself is morally right or wrong. It's just a biological calculator.
Section 4, Psychological Egoism and Power. Let's see how this biological calculator inevitably leads to conflict when you put a bunch of these human machines in the exact same room. Because our reason is only serving our own personal appetites, Hobbes arrives at a theory called psychological egoism. This basically means that every single human action is ultimately driven by self-interest. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, what about charity? What about empathy? Well, Hobbes would argue that even acts of apparent altruism are just satisfying our own mental needs. Maybe it alleviates our own discomfort at seeing someone suffer, or maybe it secures a good reputation for our own future safety. Ultimately, we are always looking out for number one.
So, here's the crucial takeaway. If everyone's good is entirely subjective to their own appetites, there's no universal highest good, no summum bonum that all humans strive for. We aren't all chasing Aristotle's good life. We're all chasing different things. But Hobbes notes a brilliant exception. We absolutely share a summum malum, a highest evil, and that is the universal terror of a violent death. As the political scholar Leo Strauss highlighted, it's not a shared moral ideal that pushes humanity together. It's this incredibly visceral, shared fear of being killed that actually motivates us to seek peace and form societies. And to avoid that violent death, we need resources, right? We need security, which leads directly to this incredibly famous quote. Hobbes states humanity has, quote, a perpetual and restless desire of power after power that ceaseth only in death. Why? Because even if you have enough food and water today, you have absolutely no guarantee you're going to have it tomorrow. Your biological machine is terrified of losing what it has. So your appetite for power, just to secure your future, is literally unquenchable as long as you're breathing.
And to make matters even more tense, Hobbes observes a natural equality among humans. Now, he definitely doesn't mean moral equality here. He means physical and mental equality. Even the strongest person needs to sleep, right? And the weakest person can just plot to kill the strongest while they rest. Ironically, because we're all somewhat equal in our ability to destroy one another, nobody is ever truly safe. This equality is exactly what makes our restless desire for power so incredibly volatile.
Section 5. Clashing Views of Human Nature. Of course, as you can imagine, not everyone agreed with this grim, mechanistic calculation of humanity. Just look at the stark contrast between these thinkers. John Locke sees us as naturally rational, possessing real moral capacity, which leads to a state of nature that's mostly peaceful, maybe a bit inconvenient, but peaceful. Jean-Jacques Rousseau goes even further, viewing early humans as inherently good, noble savages who are only corrupted later by society. But Hobbes? He stands entirely alone in his view of inherent, egoistic, fearful conflict, where the state of nature is literally a war of all against all.
He also aggressively rejects the classical tradition. For centuries, people followed Aristotle's idea of the zon politikon, that we are naturally social and political animals, meant to be in a community. Hobbes throws that right out the window. He argues that we are not naturally social at all. Any society or state is purely an artificial construct. It's a desperate, calculated invention we build strictly out of fear to avoid getting murdered.
And the pushback hasn't stopped even today. Modern critics argue Hobbes was just way too reductionist. Marxist perspectives argue his model of a purely selfish, competitive man isn't universal human nature at all, but really just a reflection of the emerging capitalist market society of his specific era. Feminist thinkers point out that he completely ignores the realities of care, maternal bonds, and human interdependence. And communitarians argue that his whole idea of the isolated, atomistic individual is an illusion. We are born into families and communities, our identities are deeply shaped by them from day one.
Section 6. The Enduring Hobbesian Legacy. So, with all these strong critiques, why exactly are we still studying him today?
Well, it's because his core ideas are woven right into the fabric of modern systems. His concept of the rational self-interested actor forms the absolute bedrock of rational choice theory and modern behavioral economics. And in global politics, his legacy is massive. The theory of political realism in international relations, which basically argues that nation-states act selfishly to maximize their own power in an anarchic world, that is a direct extension of Hobbes's human nature model. The security dilemma, where one nation building up its defense makes its neighbors feel insecure, that is pure Hobbes. Ultimately, Hobbes built an entire political universe simply by observing humans as matter in motion, driven by appetite and governed by fear. By reverse engineering human behavior all the way down to basic physics and psychology, he created a remarkably logical, incredibly systematic, if admittedly pessimistic, justification for state authority. He forces us to look at the darkest, most calculating parts of our own survival instincts.
Which brings us to the end of our explainer. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. If Thomas Hobbes is fundamentally right, if every single action we take is essentially just a mathematical calculation performed by a biological machine to ensure its own survival and power, are we even capable of genuine selflessness? Think about that the next time you hold the door open for a stranger. Thanks for joining me, and keep